Why was she kneeling in the fake snow, studying blood that wasn't real? The crimson was perfect, too perfect, a chemical marvel that beaded on white synthetic fibers just like the real thing would on packed ice in the Alaskan wilderness. It didn't freeze too fast, didn't soak in, just sat there, waiting to tell its story to anyone who knew how to listen. Major Alina Vance did. She always did. Her gloved finger hovered over the spatter pattern near the fallen mannequin. Around her, projector screens lined the walls of the massive simulation chamber, displaying a hyperrealistic alpine forest. Digital wind whipped artificial snowflakes across the scene. Her breath was visible in the chilled air, steady, controlled, the way it always was. "Report, Major." The voice crackled through her earpiece. No warmth, just demand. It belonged to General Atherton, watching from somewhere behind a one-way mirror in the control room above. She didn't look up. Didn't need to. Her focus was absolute. "Single assailant," she stated, her tone flat and cold as the landscape on the screens. "Used the simulated storm cover to approach the target from 6 o'clock. Entry wound, 4-inch blade, subclavian artery. Exit wound indicates a through-and-through puncture." She paused, studying the pattern one more time. The assailant was strong, fast, understood anatomy. The target bled out in under 90 seconds. A pause, then another voice, younger, more arrogant. "Or it was a lucky stab in the dark, General. The simulation parameters were set to near-zero visibility." "Captain Marcus Thorne, of course it was." Vance finally stood, turning her head slowly as if tracking a sound only she could hear. She faced the dark mirror knowing they were watching her, all of them judging, measuring, doubting. "Luck is the residue of design," she said softly, the words meant for them but spoken to the empty room. "The spatter pattern is directional. The assailant controlled the fall. This was not a panicked attack. It was an execution." She let the silence sit for a moment. "My assessment stands." She looked down at the plastic corpse, at the perfectly engineered blood pooling beneath it. The most important thing in the world was to see things as they were, not as you wished them to be. She'd learned that lesson a long time ago, in places that didn't officially exist, on missions that would never be acknowledged. The lights in the chamber came up, bleaching the projected forest into a pale imitation of reality. The illusion shattered. Stark gray walls replaced the wilderness. The magic was gone, leaving only the mechanics behind. "In simulation," General Atherton's voice returned, formal now. "Major Vance, my office. Captain Thorne, you and your team will reset for the next scenario." Vance unclipped her sidearm, a blue-ringed training weapon, and placed it on a nearby table. She moved with an economy of motion that was almost unnerving, each step precise, each gesture considered. There was no wasted energy in her, never had been. As she walked toward the exit, she passed Captain Thorne and his Alpha Squad. They were the facility's golden boys, sculpted from bravado and institutional praise. Thorne, with a jawline that could cut glass and an ego to match, gave her a look, condescension mixed with a flicker of irritation. His men mirrored his smirk. They saw a woman, an analyst in tactical gear, an outsider sent to evaluate their unassailable methods. They didn't see the quiet lethality coiled beneath her calm exterior. They saw a pencil pusher, not a predator. It was a common mistake, and one she never bothered to correct. It was, after all, a tactical advantage. Forward Operating Base North Star was a scar of gravel and steel carved into the side of a mountain deep in the Alaskan range. It was a place of brutal honesty, where the wind scoured away pleasantries and the cold enforced a harsh discipline. For 6 months of the year, it was a world of white and gray, a proving ground for soldiers destined for the world's most unforgiving climates. Alina Vance had been there for 3 weeks, an observer, they said, dispatched from a command so far above the base's daily operations that she was treated like a visiting ghost. Her mandate was simple: Evaluate the readiness of special operations teams for Arctic warfare. Her methods, however, were anything but. She didn't watch from the warmth of the Tactical Operations Center. She moved with the units, a silent shadow on skis or snowshoes, her breath a plume of white in the sub-zero air. She ate in the common mess hall, sitting alone at a small table, her focus on her food, not the boisterous camaraderie around her. She was an anomaly, a female field-grade officer in a world dominated by the raw kinetic energy of elite male soldiers. Her presence was a disruption to their ecosystem, and they made sure she felt it. The institutional bias was subtle but pervasive. It was in the way conversations would halt when she entered a room, then resume on a different, more sterile topic. It was in the way instructions for the day's training exercises were directed at the male officer nearest to her, even when she was the senior officer present. It was in the solicitor's questions about whether she needed lighter gear or extra thermal layers, questions never posed to her male counterparts. She answered each with a polite, firm, "No, thank you." Her voice betrayed no hint of insult. She understood. Their behavior wasn't born of malice but of ingrained culture. They were warriors in a closed society, and she was an unwelcome anthropologist. Her only real conversations were with Colonel Davies, the base commander. He was a man weathered by decades of service, with pale blue eyes that had seen too much to be impressed by bluster. He'd requested her specifically. He'd read her file, a document filled with blacked-out lines and deployments to places that didn't officially exist. "They're not used to you, Major," he'd told her during their first meeting, his office smelling of old coffee and gun oil. "They see an evaluator. They expect a man with a clipboard and a punch list. They don't expect you." "My job is not to be expected, Colonel," she'd replied. "It's to observe reality." Davies had allowed himself a small, rare smile. "Good, because reality is about to bite them hard. This new exercise I've designed, it's a monster. I need to know if they're ready for it. I need your eyes on them, not the sycophants in their chain of command. Yours." The monster was Operation Frost Fang, a multi-day force-on-force simulation deep in the unforgiving Chugach Mountains. Captain Thorne's Alpha Squad would be the primary assault element. And as the day of the operation drew closer, the undercurrent of skepticism toward Vance began to surface more openly. It coalesced around the magnetic, arrogant personality of Captain Thorne himself. He saw her quiet analysis as timidity, her meticulous planning as a lack of fighting spirit. He was a creature of momentum and aggression. She was a creature of patience and precision. They were oil and water, and the friction was becoming palpable. She watched him brief his men, his voice full of fire and certainty, and she saw something they didn't. A man who had never truly been tested by failure. He was a flawless instrument in a perfect orchestra. But the Wild didn't care for perfect instruments. It only cared for those who could play in tune with its chaos. What did they say in the mess hall that made her stop eating? The mess hall buzzed with the clatter of metal trays and the low roar of 100 conversations. It was the one place on base where the rigid hierarchy relaxed, where sergeants could joke with lieutenants and the pressure of the day could be vented. Vance sat at her usual table in the corner, methodically eating her stew. She was invisible until someone decided she wasn't. Tonight, that someone was Captain Thorne. He and his squad had taken a long table in the center of the room. Their laughter was louder, their posture more expansive than anyone else's. They were celebrating a successful run in the simulation chamber. A victory they felt was entirely their own, despite Vance's subtle course corrections from the observation booth. One of his men, a young sergeant with more muscle than sense, raised his voice. "I'm telling you, man, the kill house is all about instinct. You can't think, you just gotta do." Another chimed in. "Yeah, it's about aggression. You go in hard, you go in fast. That's how you dominate." Thorne leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a king holding court. Exactly. That's what separates the elite from the rest. We don't hesitate, we act. The young sergeant glanced toward Vance's table, then back to Thorne with a smirk. What about analysts, Captain? What separates them? The table erupted in laughter. Thorne grinned. Analysts are important. They sit in air-conditioned rooms and tell us what we already know after we've already done it. More laughter. But hey, someone's gotta write the reports, right? Another voice emboldened. Women can't have kill counts, not real ones, it's just not in the wiring. Vance's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. She didn't look up, didn't react, just set the spoon down slowly, deliberately. The conversations around her continued, oblivious, but something had shifted in the air. A subtle change in pressure, like the moment before a storm breaks. She stood, picked up her tray, walked toward the dish return. And then she stopped. Right next to Thorne's table. The conversations died, one by one, like candles being snuffed out. The entire mess hall seemed to hold its breath. Thorne looked up at her, his expression caught somewhere between amusement and annoyance. Something on your mind, Major? She didn't answer immediately, just looked at him, then at his men, then back at him. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, calm, the kind of calm that made smart people nervous. Kill counts, she said. You want to talk about kill counts? Thorne's smirk faltered slightly. It was just mess hall talk, Major, no offense. None taken, she said. But since we're on the subject, let me tell you about a mission. Mogadishu, 2019. Not the official one you read about, the other one. She paused. 3-man extraction team, 2 men, 1 woman. The woman was the team lead. They were ambushed. 17 hostiles, urban terrain, no air support, no backup. The room was silent now, every ear tuned to her words. The 2 men went down in the first 60 seconds, wounded, not dead but combat ineffective. The woman had a choice: leave them and complete the mission solo or stand and fight. Vance's eyes never left Thorne's. She chose to fight, 17-1. She used every round in her rifle, both sidearms, a knife, and when she ran out of weapons, she used theirs. She let that sink in. When the rescue team found her 4 hours later, she was still standing, covered in blood, not hers. Her 2 teammates were alive. All 17 hostiles were not. The official report listed it as a successful extraction with minimal casualties. It didn't mention the kill count. Thorne's face had gone pale. The woman received a classified commendation. No medal ceremony, no public recognition, just a note in a file that most people will never see. She leaned in slightly. So when you say women can't have kill counts, Captain, what you really mean is you've never met one who had to. She straightened up. Enjoy your meal, gentlemen. She walked away, leaving a silence so thick you could carve it with a knife. What she didn't tell them was that the woman in that story was her. Some things didn't need to be said. Operation Frost Fang began 3 days later. The weather was apocalyptic. Wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour. Visibility near zero. Temperature hovering at -15 before wind chill. It was the kind of environment that turned mistakes into body bags. The mission was simple in concept, brutal in execution. Alpha Squad, led by Captain Thorne, would infiltrate a mock enemy compound deep in the Chugach Mountains. The compound was defended by an opposing force team trained to exploit every weakness. The rules of engagement were strict. Extract a high-value target without casualties on either side. Major Vance would accompany them as an observer. Thorne had protested, of course. With all due respect, General, this is a combat operation. Adding a non-combatant observer could compromise the mission. General Atherton's response had been ice cold. Major Vance is not a non-combatant, she's your lifeline. If things go sideways, you'll be grateful she's there. That's not a suggestion, Captain, that's an order. Now 20 hours into the operation, Things had gone very, very sideways. They were lost. Not figuratively, literally lost. Thorne's aggressive pace had pushed them off their planned route. The GPS had failed in the storm. The backup nav system had frozen. And now they were somewhere in a white hell with no clear direction and a deadline that was ticking closer with every frozen breath. Thorne was trying to hide his panic, but Vance could see it. In the way his commands became sharper, more defensive. In the way he kept checking the same equipment over and over, as if repetition would change the reality. His men felt it too. The confidence that had filled the mess hall was gone, replaced by something darker, fear, not of the enemy but of nature itself. Vance had said nothing for hours, just watched, observed, took notes in her mind. But now, as she watched Thorne order his team to push forward into terrain that would kill them within hours, she made a decision. "Captain." He turned, irritation flashing across his face. "What is it, Major?" "We need to stop, find shelter, reassess. We're behind schedule, we push forward." "We push forward into that," she pointed at the wall of white ahead, "and half your team will be casualties before dawn. Not from the enemy, from hypothermia." "I know how to read a map, Major." "Then read this one." She pulled out her own map, marked with notations he hadn't bothered to make. "We're here, not where you think we are. That valley you want to cross, it's a wind tunnel, exposed, lethal in these conditions." Thorne's jaw clenched, his pride warring with the growing realization that she was right. "What do you suggest?" "There's a ridge line 2 clicks northeast. Natural shelter. We hole up, wait for a weather window, then reassess our approach." One of his sergeants, the one who'd mocked analysts in the mess hall, spoke up. "Captain, maybe we should." "I didn't ask for your opinion, Sergeant." But the damage was done. The men were looking at Vance now, not with mockery, with hope. Thorne knew it, and he hated it. "Fine," he bit out. "We'll shelter, but this is still my operation, Major, don't forget that." "I haven't forgotten anything, Captain," she said quietly. "The question is, have you?" How did she know the ridge would save them, when even their instruments had failed? The shelter wasn't much, just an overhang of rock and ice that created a pocket of calm in the screaming chaos of the storm. But it was enough. Enough to get their core temperatures stabilized. Enough to brew hot water from melted snow. Enough to remember they were human beings, not just frozen machines struggling through a white hell. Thorne's men huddled together, their earlier bravado replaced by the quiet humility that extreme cold imposes on everyone eventually. They didn't joke, didn't laugh, just focused on the simple act of staying alive. Vance sat slightly apart, her back against the rock face, her eyes closed. She wasn't sleeping. She was thinking, calculating, running through scenarios in her mind with the precision of a chess master planning 10 moves ahead. Sergeant Miller, the one who'd gone quiet after her story in the mess hall, approached her. He carried 2 canteen cups of hot water. "Thought you might want this, Major." She opened her eyes, accepted the cup with a small nod. "Thank you, Sergeant." He sat down nearby, not too close, respecting the bubble of space she always seemed to maintain. For a moment they just sat there, 2 people sharing silence in a storm. "Can I ask you something, Major?" "You can ask." "That story in the mess hall, was it true?" She took a sip of the hot water, letting the warmth spread through her chest. "Every word." "And the woman in the story?" "Some questions answer themselves, Sergeant." He nodded slowly, understanding. "I'm sorry for what we said, what I didn't stop." "You're apologizing to the wrong person," she said quietly. "You should apologize to yourself for letting other people's doubts become your own." That landed. She could see it in his face, the recognition of a truth he'd been avoiding. "How do you do it?" he asked. "Stay calm when everything's going to hell." She was quiet for a moment, considering the question, considering whether he was ready for the real answer. "Because panic is a luxury I can't afford," she finally said. When you're the only woman in the room, every mistake you make doesn't just reflect on you. It reflects on every woman who will come after you. So you don't make mistakes. You can't afford to. That's not fair. No, she agreed. It's not, but fairness is a peacetime concept. Out here, there's only what works and what doesn't. Miller took a sip from his own cup, processing. The captain, he's not handling this well. No, he's not. Why didn't you just take command? You outrank him. You could override his decisions. Vance looked at him then, really looked at him. Because taking command from him would prove him right. That I'm here to undermine him, to show him up. She shook her head. I'm not here to destroy his authority. I'm here to see if he has any worth preserving. And the jury's still out. The storm raged on through the night. By dawn, it had diminished enough for them to move, but the conditions were still brutal. Visibility maybe 100 meters. Wind still gusting hard enough to knock a man off his feet if he wasn't careful. Thorne gathered his team. He looked tired, worn, but there was something else there now too, a crack in the armor, the first hint of self-doubt. We've lost too much time, he said, his voice hoarse from shouting over the wind. We push hard for the objective, fast and direct. Captain, Vance's voice cut through the wind. Fast and direct gets us spotted. The opposing force will have watchers on every obvious approach. You have a better idea, Major. I have a different idea. Whether it's better depends on whether you're willing to listen. The men watched the exchange, their loyalties visibly torn. They'd followed Thorne for months, trusted him, but the storm had changed something, had shown them the difference between confidence and competence. Thorne's jaw worked. I'm listening. Vance pulled out her map, kneeling in the snow. The team gathered around her. The direct route is here. She traced a line with her gloved finger. Open terrain, easy to cover ground, easier to be spotted. The opposing force will have eyes on this approach. They'll be waiting. So what do you suggest? We go around through here. She indicated a series of narrow valleys and ridge lines. It's slower, harder terrain, but it keeps us below the sight lines, uses the terrain to mask our movement. That'll add hours to our timeline. Better late than dead, Captain. One of the other sergeants spoke up. Major's right, sir. If they're watching the obvious routes, we're walking into an ambush. Thorne looked around at his men, saw the agreement in their faces, felt his authority slipping away, not because Vance was taking it, but because he was losing it through his own stubbornness. It was a moment of choice. Double down on his pride or admit that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have all the answers. Fine, he said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. We use your route, Major, but I'm still in command. I never said you weren't, Captain. They moved out, and for the first time since the operation began, they moved smart. Vance took point, her knowledge of terrain and tactical movement evident in every decision. She read the land like a language, finding paths where others saw only obstacles. Thorne followed, his pride wounded but his team intact. And slowly, grudgingly, he began to see what Colonel Davies had seen, what the men were starting to see. That Alina Vance wasn't here to prove she was better than them. She was here to show them how to be better than they thought they could be. What was waiting for them at the objective that made even Vance hesitate? The approach took them 6 hours longer than Thorne's aggressive timeline would have. But they made it undetected, and in the brutal calculus of combat operations, invisible was worth more than fast. The compound sat in a small valley, protected on 3 sides by steep terrain. It was a textbook defensive position. Whoever was inside would see anyone coming from a mile away. Unless you came from the one direction no one expected. Vance had found it on the map, a narrow ravine that cut through the eastern ridge, steep, dangerous, the kind of terrain that would slow them to a crawl and leave them exposed if they were spotted. but the kind of terrain that defensive forces never bothered to watch, because they assumed no one would be crazy enough to use it. Assumption was the mother of all tactical failures. They moved through the ravine single file, roped together for safety. The walls rose on either side, close enough to touch. The wind screamed overhead but couldn't reach them down in this crack in the earth. It took 2 hours to traverse a distance that should have taken 20 minutes. But when they emerged at the far end, they were inside the defensive perimeter, undetected, exactly where they needed to be. Thorne, to his credit, didn't gloat about the success or lash out about the time. He simply gave the hand signal to hold position while they observed the target. The compound was quiet, too quiet. Vance studied it through her scope, her breath slow and controlled. Something felt wrong. The defensive positions were empty. No movement, no heat signatures on the thermal imaging. "It's a trap," she whispered. Thorne looked at her. "You don't know that." "I know that a defended position doesn't sit empty unless they want us to think it's empty. Or they got pulled for another tasking, or they're inside." "Captain, I'm telling you. And I'm telling you we're going in. That's the mission." Vance felt the familiar weight of command friction. The moment when you know you're right but the person in charge won't listen. She'd been here before, too many times. "If we go in through the front, we're walking into a kill box. Then we don't go through the front, we breach from multiple points, overwhelm their response time." It wasn't the worst plan, but it wasn't the right plan either. Vance made a decision then, one that would either validate Thorne's authority or destroy what little trust they'd built. "I'm going in alone," she said. "Scout the interior, confirm if it's clear or if it's a trap." "Absolutely not. We move as a team." "If it's an ambush, a team gives them multiple targets. One person, quiet and fast, gives us actionable intelligence without compromising the entire squad." Miller spoke up. "She's right, Captain, let her recon." Thorne's face darkened. "You don't get a vote, Sergeant." "With respect, sir, if Major Vance is wrong, we lose one person. If you're wrong, we lose everyone." The truth of it hung in the frozen air between them. Thorne looked at Vance, really looked at her, saw the absolute certainty in her eyes, the kind of certainty that came from doing things like this before, in places where the stakes weren't simulated. 15 minutes, he said finally. "If you're not back in 15, we come in hard." "Understood." She moved before he could change his mind, shed her heavier gear, keeping only her sidearm and a knife, became a shadow in the gray landscape. The compound's outer wall was designed to be imposing, but imposing meant predictable. She found a drainage culvert, barely wide enough for her to fit through, squeezed herself into the space, controlling her breathing as the metal pressed against her chest. Inside, she emerged in a corner of the compound that cameras wouldn't cover. Poor design, predictable. She moved through the shadows, every sense heightened, listening, watching, feeling the space around her for any sign of life. The buildings were cold, dark, empty. Too empty. She rounded a corner and froze. There in the center of the compound was the high-value target, a mannequin dressed in civilian clothes, sitting in a chair. And surrounding it in a perfect circle were pressure plates. The entire center of the compound was rigged. Anyone who rushed in through the front gates would trigger a cascade of simulated explosives. The whole team would be marked as casualties in seconds. Thorne had been wrong. She'd been right. But there was no satisfaction in being right, when right meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. She was about to key her radio when she heard it, a voice, low and controlled, coming from one of the buildings. Not the opposing force. Something else. She moved toward the sound, her body language shifting from tactical to predatory, found a window, looked inside. And her blood went cold. It was supposed to be an exercise, simulated, safe. But the man tied to the chair inside wasn't a mannequin. He was real. And the situation had just become something far more serious than a training operation. Who was the real prisoner, and why wasn't anyone supposed to know he was there? His name was Rashid Malik. She recognized him from the intelligence briefs, a bomb maker, a facilitator, a ghost who'd been linked to a dozen attacks across 3 continents but had never been caught, never been confirmed. Until now. He sat in the chair, hands zip-tied behind him, a hood over his head. 2 men stood guard, not American military, private contractors maybe, or something else, something outside the official chain of command. This wasn't part of the exercise. This was something real happening inside a simulated operation. Vance's mind raced. The implications were staggering. Someone had used the cover of Operation Frost Fang to conduct an actual rendition, had hidden a real high-value target inside a fake scenario, knowing the confusion would mask the truth. The question was, who knew? Did Colonel Davies know? General Atherton? Or had someone higher up the chain decided to compartmentalize this so deeply that the people running the base were just as blind as the trainees? She pulled back from the window, her pulse controlled but her mind screaming with possibilities. She needed to get back to Thorne, needed to warn him that what he was about to walk into wasn't a training scenario anymore. She keyed her radio, keeping her voice barely above a whisper. Vance to Alpha 6, do not approach the compound. I repeat, do not approach. Real-world situation in progress. Need immediate command guidance. Static. Then Thorne's voice, confused and irritated. Say again, did you say real world? Confirmed. There's a real prisoner inside the compound. Contractors on site. This is not part of the exercise. A pause, then, are you sure? Was she sure? She'd been doing this long enough to know the difference between actors and actual operators. These men weren't role-playing. Their weapons were loaded with real ammunition, not simulation rounds. Their posture was tactical and alert, not the performative aggression of trainers running an exercise. I'm sure. Another pause, longer this time. She could almost hear Thorne's thoughts grinding through the implications. Orders? He finally asked, and for the first time since she'd met him, there was no arrogance in his voice. Just the question of a man who'd suddenly realized he was in over his head. Stand by. I'm coming back to your position. We need to figure out what's happening before we do anything else. She began to move but stopped. One of the contractors had stepped outside, radio in hand. He was reporting to someone. She couldn't hear the words, but she recognized the body language. Something had changed. Some alarm had been raised. They knew someone was here. She had seconds to make a choice. Pull back to Thorne's position and let command sort this out. Or go in now, while she still had the element of surprise, and secure Malik before the situation escalated. It wasn't a choice, not really. Because she knew what would happen if she pulled back. The contractors would disappear with Malik. The operation would be scrubbed. Questions would be buried under classification stamps and non-disclosure agreements. And a man who'd killed hundreds would slip away into the bureaucratic shadows. She keyed her radio one more time. Vance to Alpha 6, I'm going in. If you don't hear from me in 5 minutes, call it up the chain, all the way to the top. Tell them Major Alina Vance initiated contact with unknown contractors holding a real-world HVT. Make sure they know I'm doing this on my authority, not yours. Major, wait. She cut the transmission. Then she moved. The contractor outside was focused on his radio conversation, his back to her position. Tactical mistake. She covered the distance in seconds, her movements fluid and silent. Controlled his weapon arm with her left hand. Struck the radio transmit button with her right, then the side of his neck with a precise blow that disrupted blood flow to his brain. He went down without a sound. She caught him, lowered him to the ground, secured his weapon, checked the door. Locked. She pulled a small pry bar from her vest, worked the lock. Military installations always cut corners on interior security. They assumed the perimeter was enough. Another tactical mistake. The door opened. She went through low and fast, her sidearm up and steady. The second contractor was faster than the first. He turned, saw her, reached for his weapon. But he hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, because she was a woman, because his training told him the threat would come from big male operators, not a slender female major in winter gear. That fraction of a second cost him everything. She put 2 simulated rounds in his center mass. She'd loaded sim rounds out of habit, before her mind caught up to the fact that his weapon was loaded with real ammunition. The rounds hit him in the chest with enough force to knock him back, but they didn't penetrate. Body armor, of course. He recovered, bringing his rifle up, but she was already moving, closing the distance, getting inside his engagement range. Her hand caught the barrel, pushed it aside as he fired. The real round went wide, punching through the wall. She drove her knee into his thigh, deadening the muscle, stripped the rifle from his hands with a twisting motion, reversed it, put the stock against his temple in a controlled strike that dropped him without killing him. 2 down. Malik sat in his chair, hood still on, unmoving. Either he was incredibly disciplined or he didn't understand what was happening. She approached carefully, weapon ready, pulled the hood off. He blinked in the sudden light, his dark eyes taking her in. Recognition flickered across his face. "Major Vance," he said in accented English, "I know who you are." That stopped her cold. "How?" He smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "You think you're the only one who studies your enemies. You think your file is as classified as you believe." He leaned forward as much as his restraints would allow. "The woman who killed 17 men in Mogadishu, the ghost who dismantled our cell in Karachi without firing a shot. Oh yes, we know about you. Then you know what I'm capable of." "I know you're alone," he said. "I know those 2 contractors were my jailers, not my executioners. And I know that if you kill me here, you'll have a very difficult time explaining why." He was right about all of it. But he'd made one critical miscalculation. "Who said anything about killing you?" she asked. Before he could answer, she heard it. Voices outside. Thorne's team, not following her orders, coming in anyway. The situation was about to get much more complicated. What happened when Thorne burst through that door and saw her standing over the prisoner? The door exploded inward with a controlled breach. Thorne came through first, rifle up, scanning for threats. His team flowed in behind him, a textbook entry that would have made any instructor proud. They froze when they saw the scene. 2 contractors on the ground, unconscious but breathing. Vance standing over Malik, her sidearm pointed at his head with absolute steadiness. And Malik himself, hands bound, calm as a man having coffee despite being at gunpoint. "Major, what the hell is this?" Thorne demanded, his rifle now covering Malik. "Exactly what I told you," Vance said without looking away from her prisoner. "A real-world HVT, meet Rashid Malik, bomb maker, terrorist facilitator, wanted in 11 countries." She paused. "And apparently someone's off-the-books detainee." Miller was the first to recognize the name. "Wait, the Rashid Malik, the one from the Ankara attack." "And the Istanbul bombing, and the Cairo market massacre," Vance confirmed. "Among others." Thorne lowered his rifle slightly, his tactical mind trying to process the implications. "Someone's using our training op as cover for a rendition." "That would be my assessment." "This is above our pay grade, Major, way above." "Agreed, which is why you're going to call Colonel Davies, right now, and tell him exactly what we found." But before Thorne could reach for his radio, Malik spoke. "They won't help you," he said softly. The men you knocked unconscious work for people who don't answer to colonels or generals. They answer to the ghosts in your government who do what must be done without oversight, without accountability. Shut up, Thorne snapped. But Malik continued, his eyes locked on Vance. You know I'm right, Major. You've worked in those shadows before, you know how this goes. Those contractors wake up and this entire incident gets classified. Everyone involved signs papers they don't read. And I disappear to a black site somewhere if I'm lucky. If I'm unlucky, he smiled again. Well, you know what happens to unlucky prisoners. Vance's jaw tightened. She did know. She'd seen it. And it had kept her awake enough nights that she'd learned to live with insomnia. This is the part where you make a choice, Malik said. Follow the rules, hand me over to men who will torture me for information I don't have, then kill me without trial. Or break the rules, kill me now quickly and save everyone the moral complexity. It was a calculated provocation, trying to get under her skin, trying to force her into a mistake. Thorne stepped forward. He's right about one thing, we can't hold him. And if those contractors are who he says they are, we're creating an international incident just by being here. So what do you suggest, Captain? Thorne looked at the unconscious contractors, at Malik, at his own men who were watching this unfold with the dawning realization that they'd stumbled into something far beyond a training exercise. I suggest we call it in, and let the people who get paid to make impossible decisions make this one. It was the right answer, the safe answer. But Vance had spent enough time in the shadows to know that the right answer and the safe answer weren't always the same thing. She holstered her sidearm. Malik's eyes widened slightly. You're letting me go. No, she said, I'm letting you live, there's a difference. She turned to Thorne. Make the call, but before you do, there's something you need to understand. This man is responsible for the deaths of over 300 civilians. Women, children, people who never signed up to be part of anyone's war. He did that from a distance, using bombs and proxies, never getting his own hands dirty. She looked back at Malik. And now he sits there, calm and collected, trying to manipulate us into either killing him or letting him go. Because either outcome serves his purposes. Death makes him a martyr. Freedom lets him kill again. So what do? Miller asked quietly. We do our jobs, Vance said. We secure the prisoner. We call up the chain. We let the system work, even when we don't trust it. Because the moment we start making these decisions on our own, we become exactly what he thinks we are. Killers with flags instead of causes. She walked to the door, looked out at the frozen landscape beyond. The easy thing would be to put a bullet in his head and walk away. The hard thing is to remember that we're soldiers, not executioners, that we serve something larger than our own sense of justice. Thorne studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Miller, secure the prisoner. Diaz, watch those contractors. I'll call the colonel. As Thorne stepped outside to make the call, Malik spoke one more time. You're making a mistake, Major. Probably, Vance agreed, but it's my mistake to make. 20 minutes later, the valley was swarming with helicopters. Real ones, not part of any exercise. Colonel Davies himself was on the first bird, along with a team of military intelligence officers and legal advisors. The contractors were taken into custody. Malik was transferred to official DOD custody under proper legal protocols. The entire compound was locked down and declared off-limits pending investigation. An Alpha squad stood in the snow, watching it all unfold with the numb realization that they just stumbled into something that would follow them for the rest of their careers. Davies approached Vance as she supervised the transfer of Malik to the helicopter. Hell of a thing you found here, Major. Yes, sir. The contractors are claiming they had authorization at the highest levels, that this was a sanctioned operation. And did they? Davies was quiet for a moment. That's being determined, But regardless of their authority, the way they were holding Malik was problematic. No documentation, no oversight, just two men and a prisoner in a compound that was supposed to be empty. Sounds like someone was trying to make him disappear before the paperwork could catch up. That's one interpretation, Davies agreed. Another is that someone was trying to protect a valuable intelligence asset from hostile actors who might want him dead or liberated. And which interpretation do you believe, sir? Davies looked at her with those pale blue eyes that had seen too many ugly truths to pretend easy answers existed. I believe we live in a complicated world, Major, and that the people who see things clearly are often the most dangerous, not because they want to break the rules, but because they know exactly when the rules need to be broken. He paused. You could have killed him. No one would have questioned it. Heat of the moment, threat neutralization, it would have been clean. Clean isn't the same as right, Colonel. No, he agreed, it's not. The final debriefing happened 3 days later. General Atherton was present via video link. The contractors had been quietly reassigned. Malik was in official custody, awaiting trial. The investigation was ongoing, but the prevailing narrative was already being shaped. A training exercise that accidentally discovered an unauthorized rendition operation. Clean, tidy, bureaucratically digestible. But in that conference room, with the evidence laid out in front of them, another narrative emerged. Captain Marcus Thorne's narrative. He stood at attention, his after-action report in hand, and told the truth. About his mistakes, about his arrogance, about the moment when he'd let his pride override his judgment and almost led his team into an ambush. And then he told them about Major Vance. Sir, I want it on record that Major Vance's tactical assessment was correct at every stage of this operation. Her navigation saved us when I lost our position. Her infiltration plan allowed us to discover the real situation before it escalated. And her decision to secure the prisoner rather than neutralize him demonstrated the kind of moral courage I aspire to. He paused, his voice dropping. I questioned her competence. I dismissed her warnings, and I let my ego endanger my team. If not for her intervention, I would have led my men into a situation that could have resulted in actual casualties. I request that this be noted in my official record, and that Major Vance be commended for her actions. It was a rare thing, a captain falling on his sword not to protect himself, but to elevate someone else. General Atherton's face was unreadable. Noted, Captain. Major Vance, do you have anything to add? She looked at Thorne, saw the man he was becoming, the leader he might eventually be. Just one thing, sir. Captain Thorne made mistakes, but he also made the hardest choice a leader can make. He listened when his plan was failing. He adapted when circumstances changed. And when it mattered most, he put the mission and his men ahead of his pride. That's not failure. That's growth. After the formal debriefing, Vance found herself in the base armory, methodically cleaning her rifle. It was ritual, a way of resetting. The smell of solvent and steel was calming. The door opened. Miller entered, carrying 2 canteen cups of coffee. Thought you might want this, Major. She accepted the cup with a small nod. They'd had this exchange before, in a snow shelter during the storm. But this time, there was no hesitation in his approach, no uncertainty about whether he belonged in her space. Respect changes the geometry of relationships. They're saying you saved his life, Miller said. Malik's, that you could have killed him and didn't. I saved his right to trial, Vance corrected. There's a difference. Is there to a man like that? She set down the rifle, looked at him. To us, there has to be a difference. Otherwise, we're just tribal executioners with better weapons. Miller absorbed that. The captain's been different since we got back. Quieter, listens more. Failure is a better teacher than success, Vance said. Success tells you that you're right. Failure makes you wonder if you ever were. And you, what did this mission teach you? She considered the question. What had it taught her? That the culture can change, she said finally. Not overnight, not completely, but one person at a time, one moment of listening instead of dismissing, one choice to see competence instead of gender. She looked back at her rifle, running the cleaning rod through the barrel one more time. You asked me once how I stay calm when everything's going to hell. The truth is, I don't always. I just can't afford to show it. But maybe that's starting to change too. Miller finished his coffee, stood. For what it's worth, Major, I'm glad you were there. We all are. After he left, Vance sat alone with the quiet sounds of her work. Outside, the sun was setting over the Alaskan mountains, painting the snow in shades of gold and purple. She thought about Malik, sitting in a cell somewhere, waiting for a trial that might never come. She thought about the contractors who'd been operating in the shadows, answerable to no one. She thought about Thorne, learning that leadership wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room. And she thought about the 17 men in Mogadishu, the ones she'd killed to save her teammates, the ones who'd made her understand that violence was sometimes the answer, but never the whole answer. Strength is not the power to take a life. It's the discipline to know when not to. She'd proven that strength in a dozen countries, on a dozen missions that would never be acknowledged, but proving it here in front of men who dismissed her, in a situation that demanded every ounce of her training and moral clarity. That had been different. That had been a victory measured not in enemy casualties, but in minds changed, in respect earned, in a culture that had begun to crack just enough to let something new grow through. She finished cleaning the rifle, reassembled it with practiced, efficient movements, stood, looked out the small frosted window at the mountains. The world was still brutal, still unforgiving. But maybe, just maybe, it was also learning. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts, and sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought with weapons, they're fought with patience, with precision, with the quiet certainty that competence will always outlast arrogance. Elena Vance had fought that battle, and she'd won it without firing a shot.